Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Thomas and today we'll be talking about Unit 3.1 Sources of Finance. So the table of content for this video is I'll explain to you the need for finance, then I'll show you the internal sources of finance and the external sources of finance. Keep in mind this is a two-part video, so there's going to be a second part to finish off with the sources of finance. So the need for finance. Why do businesses even need sources of finance or finance? So there are multiple reasons. For example, startups um, or expansion, such as purchasing of premises, machinery, and vehicles. And that goes for both expansion and startups. If you have in mind that when a business, if there is a startup, they do not have as much finance if the individuals starting the company up aren't really super wealthy. That's why you'll need some sort of finance. Or even if a company is smaller or medium sized and they want to have a bigger expansion, they need to have the money to buy all these properties or extra machinery from someone. Also, there is the need for finance for ongoing costs, such as raw materials for the inventory. If you are a manufacturer, you always need to buy raw materials to make your products. Also, rent, wages, or even utility bills, such as water, electricity, and so on. There are two categorizations for this expenditure in the latter part. One is the capital expenditure, which is finance that is spent on fixed and capital equipment. Example given are tools or machinery, something that stays for a long time and helps the business to keep generating revenue over and over again. And then there's revenue expenditure, which is basically finance spent on daily and routine operations. So, what I just want to tell you what you should take away from each source of finance that I'll be explaining to you guys now. First of all, what is the source of finance and where does the money come from? So this is the easy part. Then, is it an internal or external source of finance? That is very important because a lot of times the IB will ask that in exams. And then, is the source of finance suited for the short, medium, or rather the long term, which is also a typical IB question, and then the situational advantages and disadvantages. Let's start with the internal sources of finance, which, wait, what? Oh my goodness. Okay, there we go. I'm sorry for that. Let's start with personal funds. First of all, internal sources of finance just means that the finance or the money comes from within the business somehow. And you'll be seeing that with the examples here. So first of all, personal funds / owner's capital, which is the same thing. This is a long-term option which puts the capital of the owner at stake, meaning that the owner of for example, a sole trader, let's say a sole trader, he puts his own money into the business. And this is a long-term option because he's going to put the money in there for a long time. There are rare circumstances where this is for the short term, but usually when an owner decides to put his own wealth into a business, that means it's going to be long term. Then there are retained profits, which describes the surplus of income after all deductions, such as dividends to shareholders. This means at the income statement, the very bottom number, that's the retained profits, and that's the money that comes back into the business. And this can be used for any option, any period of time, but usually it's long term also because the business already has the money. And the disadvantage of this is that it takes away funds from the business itself. So because it doesn't come from external sources, that means that the balance sheet will be directly affected. And then the third internal source of finance and the last one is the sale of assets, which describes the selling of a business assets to raise finance. One example would be if a company has a premise that is not used anymore, or that they still use but they also need the money, and they sell that premise or that property, then this would be considered a sale of asset and an internal sources of finance. This is a long-term option as the fixed assets are sold completely. The advantage of this is that it often leads to the disposal of obsolete assets, so assets that the business does not need anymore. But a disadvantage is that the potential that it might compromise a business ability to raise working capital due to insufficient resources for production. For example, if a business is forced or wants to sell their machinery or some of their machinery just to get some sort of finance for their activities, then there may not be enough machinery to raise enough working capital or make enough revenue, make enough inventory, and so on. Now let's get to the external source of finance. External just means that it comes from outside of the business. That's pretty simple. The first one would be share capital, which is obtained by selling additional shares of a limited liability company. So if a company is a limited liability company, it is able to sell new shares to other or even existing shareholders, and this will bring in some sort of finance, or not some sort, but permanent finance. And this is a long-term option, as I just said, because it is permanent and you do not have to pay it back. Yeah. And then only disadvantage may be that the existing shareholders get diluted, which may cause conflict, stakeholder conflict or tension between the owners of the company and, for example, the management who decided to do this action. Next one would be loan capital, which is, as the name already tells you, borrowing funds from a financier/lender, for example, a commercial bank, meaning if a business goes to a commercial bank or any bank and tries to get a loan. A loan agreement is set for a certain time period in which the loan has to be repaid, either in installments, meaning, for example, per month or per quarter. They always pay a bit back, or they just pay back the full amount at the end of the period. At the end of the period that is set in the loan agreement. So this means also that it can be short, medium, or long term. Usually it's more medium or long term, and it all depends on the agreed period, right? Now, the next slide. Oh, one more disadvantage to the loan capital, which does not exist in the share capital, is that interest needs to be paid to the lender, which affects the bottom line of the business. So if you think about it, if a business has to pay interest each month or each year, it will show up on the income statement, and it will also directly affect how much profit they will have after all the deductions from the revenue. I have two more examples for this video for loan capital. The first one is mortgage, which everyone is probably a bit familiar with. It's a type of loan capital involving fixed assets to be put as collateral, and usually it's property. I'd say in 90% of the times it is property that is used as collateral. And this is a long-term source of finance usually, because if you put your property as collateral, you will put it in a long-term loan. That's just the way it is. The other one is the debenture, and it's a type of loan capital yet again that is secured against a specific asset. And debentures is something that even us individuals can buy from a company. So a company would, a company would issue these debentures, and we individuals or institutions would buy up these debentures, meaning that the money goes to the company, and we hold these debentures, and we as holders get some benefits. Although we don't have any ownership rights, we do receive interest, and we obviously get repaid at the end of the period with the whole principal amount. And sometimes we even get dividends. And if that is the case, it's before the shareholders do. So in that case, we're better off as shareholders when it comes to dividends or getting paid back. And this one would also be long-term usually, because a company wouldn't go through the process of issuing debentures just for a 1-month period. That just doesn't happen. So that's it for this video. Please watch the second part, which will be a bit shorter, but we'll tell you about the rest of the sources of finance. Thank you, and see you next time.